Cartoon Network's been in a really weird place ever since the Great Merger. No, not that one. That one hasn't happened yet. Wow, they've been doing this for a while, huh? Ever since the studio itself got absorbed into Warner Bros., with Warner ditching the iconic Cartoon Network building to move in with them and all, we've been in an era of revivals. But only if your show came out in the 2010s. Their few original stuff has been heading to Adult Swim, and the cartoon shorts have been dropping for a while over on one of the Warner YouTube channels, but the shows that they really push out and proudly attach the Cartoon Network label onto are the shows that were popular from 2012 through 2016, which isn't a coincidence because for a lot of people, that was their peak. And these shows never really lost their cultural relevance. Regular Show and Gumball are foundational to modern internet humor. Steven Universe music still garners over 10 million listeners on streaming per month. And if we're being honest, Adventure Time basically never ended. A year after it ended, they announced Distant Lands, and that evolved from a victory lap to a warm-up for a never-ending marathon. Not that I'm complaining. Cartoon Network also hasn't had a massive hit since Steven Universe ended for one reason or another. Their late 2010s lineup was affected by people ditching cable, and those shows took forever to get added to streaming unless you still had cable, in which case you could watch them on the Cartoon Network app and website, but look at your ratings, man. You couldn't have cut a better deal with Hulu while waiting for HBO Max to become a thing. If you didn't already have a dedicated fandom who weren't held back by the jump to streaming because they already knew where to find episodes online without a cable login, then your show was pretty much doomed to be canceled after a couple of seasons. You got that initial pickup, and that's all she wrote. Then when you hit the 2020s, you had Infinity Train, but to keep it simple, it got screwed over by both timing and a merger. And the rest of their shows seem to have been made without a clear idea of where they would end up, so they all got dumped on HBO Max and didn't really find an audience. Max launched with HBO's pre-existing adult audience, so they weren't gonna show up for Tig and Seek. Long story short, the early 2020s were not kind to Cartoon Network, and now they only want to stick with their surefire hits. The IP they can make brand new shows out of, and so do streamers across the market. But what makes it weird is that, with the exception of anything created by Craig or Gendy, everything from the late 90s to late 2000s of Cartoon Network has been getting the cold shoulder. If you weren't producing HD, they don't even want to look at you, buddy. And even if you were, you're not gonna make the cut if Gen Alpha can't lip sync your theme song. Cartoon Network's president, Michael Ouwuleen, even said that as someone who has worked on properties like Adventure Time and Regular Show have a pitch, then the people over at Cartoon Network Studios will hear them out. And to me, it really sounds like they're gatekeeping to that 2010s prime. Cartoon Network is one of the most beloved animation libraries anywhere. How do you decide when to revive something, reboot it, continue it, or leave it alone? A lot of that is with Cartoon Network Studios, with Sam Register and the team. They're working with the series creators who have worked on, say, Adventure Time and Regular Show, or something like that. So, if someone who has worked on one of those properties has a pitch, then they'll listen to it, and then they'll come talk to me about it, or Vanessa Brookman, who does Cartoon Network across Europe, about it, and then it's a conversation from there. Now, if this was just this quote, I wouldn't think much of it. But over the years, we've learned about pitches from other creators that were rejected, and wouldn't you know it, their shows aired in the 2000s. So today, I'm in a mood to cover these rejected revivals, throwing in my 2 cents on if they would work, should they miraculously get picked up today, and try to figure out why the powers that be skipped over that Zillennial nostalgia. Starting with a show we've talked about a couple of times before, but actually has something new to break down, Galactic Kids Next Door. I got a whole video going over the history of this proposed continuation, but to give you the skinny, G-Candy is a sequel series that Tom Warburton has been pining to make since the original wrapped up, planting the seeds for it with the Splinter Cell story arc in the final season of the show.
Nigel Uno is finally ready.
Agreed. It is time to take him away.
Operation Interviews wasn't just a goodbye. It was an invite for Cartoon Network to spend a bit more time with these characters and flesh out their world, aging them up alongside the audience, similar to Ben 10 Alien Force or Steven Universe Future. Of course, animation fans wouldn't be aware of the concept until 2015, when Warburton orchestrated an ARG with a Facebook profile named Numbavine and a website rainbowmonkeys.com, which was secretly a Galactic Kids Next Door database. But what really caught everyone's attention and went viral was an animatic that was initially meant to release at the end of the ARG, but leaked as it was really easy to dissect the site, giving us a gritty reintroduction into the world of K&D as number 1, now in his teens, is seemingly seemingly put on trial for being infected with adulthood, Earth as a whole having a bad rep due to adults ruling the planet. So in order to prove himself, number 1 is about to do something bad to the planet, presumably destroying it or eradicating all adult life. As Nigel contemplates this decision, an imprisoned Chad, aka number 264, pleads for him to back out, concerned for their friends and family.
What about Sector V? Hoagie, Cookie, Wallaby, and Abigail! Abby would never let you do this.
Long and the short of it, this animatic was all we had in terms of a tangible story. Something ominous, vague, and cool enough to drum up interest and get people talking online. Another animatic drop featuring numbers 3 and 4 talking to Number Vine, the true identity of Nigel's ex Lizzie, who urges Sector V to evacuate Earth as soon as possible before getting attacked herself, implying that GK&D operatives who were masquerading as Earthlings grew attached to the planet and are now ready to betray their own in order to save it. Cool stuff, but this animatic only existed so something would still drop on April 1st after the initial animatic leaked. Ultimately, Cartoon Network rejected this series in 2015, presumably because, prior to the current era of television, there was an idea that current audiences wouldn't be familiar with a series that wrapped up 7 years ago, and they lacked any desire to get them familiar. A stark contrast to where we're currently at, where regular show is rolling out new episodes 9 years after its conclusion, and if Lars of the Stars premieres in 2027, that'll be 7 years since Steven Universe ended. Still, Warburton held his head high and remained optimistic that this series could happen someday. And at NostalgiaCon 2025, he assembled the voice actors together for a brand new table read of Galactic Kids Next Door, complete with storyboards, finally giving the public another glimpse into the story after a decade. I thought it was fine. The table read follows number 4 as he believes someone in the treehouse stole his underwear. Yeah, great start. This goofy framing allows us to check in on Sector V and see where they're at in life after number 1 dipped for space. Evidently, they've seen better days. They're still doing their thing, but it's clear they've lost a bit of that spark. They even blocked off number 1's room from entry. They're taking it as if little homie died. To be fair, they were under the idea that they'd never see him again after an abrupt departure, alongside the fact their base is a part of his house. They're basically in that last season of That 70s Show where Topher Grace left, but the characters are still hanging in Eric's basement every day. Number 5 has been drowning in the pressure and responsibilities that come with being the new leader of the team, especially because number 1 is an impossible act to follow. Everyone's kinda just running around without closure. That is until Nigel himself returns, as number 4's hunt for underwear leads to a fateful encounter in number 1's room. Not to rejoin the team, but to recruit them for one last mission. Number 1 also looks younger than he does in the initial GK&D animatic, which could just be chalked up to the fact that there's a 10-year gap between these videos, but I can't help but read this as the first animatic happening way later in the timeline. That there's at least a year or two between number 1 coming back to Earth and Chad begging him to spare it. Number 1 reveals that the GK&D is fucking garbage and has essentially reduced him to a janitor. They're space racist and hate him because he comes from Earth, which is ruled by adults. Which makes me think other alien species stop aging fairly early into their life cycle, since being a kid is seemingly the default. Apparently the GK&D captured Father off screen, and whether if it was due to spite or manipulation, number 1 ended up sending him free, giving Nigel no choice but to return back home and get the band back together before Father arrives. And that's pretty much it. Again, I think this is fine. I feel like this sets up a lot of interesting concepts. Number 1's desire to be accepted by the GK&D, Abby having to come into her own as the leader, since if this is staying consistent with the finale, number 1 will ultimately return to space and steer the GK&D in a better direction, and Father will get memory wiped or something, only recalling just enough to know that he needs to find number 1. The GK&D itself is brimming with all sorts of crazy possibilities. After all this time, I'm still so curious about everything this has to offer. But on the other hand, this just seems like more Kids Next Door, which is fine. But when GK&D was first revealed as something Warburton wanted to make, I was a teenager. It was easier for me to overlook K&D's habit of mixing in lowbrow toilet humor with its elaborate lore and clever writing. Seeing this table read as an adult definitely brings me some joy, but it also makes me think that if GK&D were to come out now, it could not exist in this form. Don't get me wrong, I think K&D should be revived for a new generation. I think a show like this is very important for kids to have, as it helps challenge your imagination, encourages community building, and is strangely empowering.
I felt like I was a part of something special watching this.
It champions childhood and highlights the many strengths we have at an early age. Having this cartoon in my life growing up made me appreciate each and every year I was a kid, instead of nowadays, where it feels like society is rushing them to become adults as quickly as possible. With that said, number 4, crying over underwear is not amusing as a late 20-something. That doesn't mean the show's sense of humor should change, it just means it's not innately for me anymore, the audience who grew up with it. But then you really do end up in this weird scenario where the show feels like it's not really for anyone, because we're picking up a story from the 2000s, but serving it to an audience that now was either born in the late 2010s or early 2020s. If GK&D were to ever exist and be a hit, or at least popular enough to have people farm clips on Twitter, they'd have to compromise and make it something akin to Fairly Odd Parents: A New Wish. A successor that new kids can jump into and have a great time with, connecting with brand new characters, while older viewers can enjoy seeing where their childhood phase ended up and how this fictional world has evolved like our own. Give us a show that follows a new generation of operatives, a brand new Sector V, and have them idolize the old Sector V. That they treat everyone as mythological figures, especially number 1, the legend who one day vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, our legacy characters are still around, working undercover as teen operatives, and both sides end up colliding as they unravel a conspiracy that leads us to the story of the Galactic Kids Next Door and number 1's internal struggle. I really think that's how you have your cake and eat it too. Make a show that's primarily geared at the kids of today and tell the GK&D story through their eyes. Have newcomers get just as excited over the idea of seeing Nigel, Hoagie, Kooky, Wallaby, and Abigail in action, so that when it finally happens, they have a reason to be just as invested as older viewers who are tuning in, or watching highlights of the show over Instagram Reels. It also enables the writers to expand the world of Kids Next Door in 2 distinct ways. In one direction, you get to see how the K&D as an organization has adapted in modern times. How do they incorporate smartphones, tablets, and other modern devices into their 2x4 technology? How have they upgraded things like the decommissioning module? And what adult villains have risen up in the age of social media and the internet taking over in general? There's so many cool things you could do there. But then, by going in the other direction as a B story, fleshing out the galactic side of the Kids Next Door, we get to see how other planets handle adulthood, how other aliens treat aging, and honor legacy of operatives who get too old for the job. We get to figure out how deep all of this really goes. There are so many questions that I think deserve answers, and who knows, maybe one day we'll get them. They just gotta find an angle that works. Something that gives the people in charge enough reassurance that this isn't just pandering to a niche audience of adults who still care about this thing, and that Kids Next Door can capture a modern kid audience who will become obsessed with it. And with it being one of the earlier cartoons that always delve into its lore and lead into an overarching story, I think it wouldn't take much to capture a new generation. They just gotta take it a tiny bit more seriously, which that initial animatic seemed to promise. You're competing with FNAF and object shows now. Less bookers, more eradication of the human race.
Uno, what have you done?
There was a time where Cartoon Network was at an absolute low, at least when it came to their cartoons. 2008 and 2009, an era where Canadian imports and CN took over the network, as a lot of shows from throughout the decade had been coming to an end. The only originals really standing out and keeping things afloat were Ben 10 Alien Force, Flapjack, and my favorite of the bunch, Chowder. Everything about it was just right up my alley. From its bizarre sense of humor to the unique art direction. And as someone who has always had an affinity for the culinary arts and animation, I was obviously going to gravitate towards the cartoon about cooking. And I don't think I was alone in thinking Chowder was the best the network had to offer at the time, given that it's fondly remembered to this day. It's had a surprising amount of staying power online, as I always see memes of it popping up here and there, along with heapings of fan art. The show's genuinely a great time, and it feels like it deserved way more episodes than it actually got. Now, 49 episodes is nothing to sneeze at, but given that everything that came after it is, still going, it feels ridiculous that something this good only ran for 2 years. It felt like Chowder never reached the peak of its insanity. So, it really pains me to say that Cartoon Network passed on a new iteration of the show, Chowder First Course. A reboot of Chowder that Greenblatt pitched around 2024, because Cartoon Network was actually interested in exploring a revival aimed at slightly younger audiences. In this version of Chowder, the lad wouldn't have been working at Mung Dao's Catering, but instead would be attending a culinary school with panini and gorgonzola. all the fan favorites still would have had a presence in the show, but it would have been centered around these three, as opposed to the original series having episodes not only focused on Chowder, but some of the adults like Mung and Schnitzel. I actually really dig this premise, even if it would have skewed younger, solely because I always felt like Gorgonzola is a character who deserved more screen time, only appearing in 15 out of the 49 episodes, with a few of those being cameos or minor roles. Making him a main character and cementing him as the Squidward of the group would have been fun. Judging by some of the concept art, we would have gotten to see what differentiates the three kids as chefs, and by extension, artists and people. There was a lot of potential to flesh out these characters and have them connect with audiences, while still keeping things completely chaotic and silly.
So why didn't it happen?
Well, according to Greenblatt himself, Cartoon Network said they had no money to make it.
So why did you ask for it then, buddy?
I get it. Money gets funny and plans change. It's just that from the outside looking in, it sounds like they might have only had the budget to greenlight a handful of projects, and looking what's on the horizon now, Chowder wasn't as safe of a bet as something more recent. There is also the fact that Cartoon Network's interest in shows aimed at younger audiences
Ended up being a phase.
Jessica's Big Little World was only one season, and even though they still have Heyo Bimo and the Foster spinoff on the way, I have a feeling those might be one and done. Side quests and the new Gumball is the sweet spot for them when it comes to the demographic they want to focus on, which is the exact audience they were already catering to. So while I do think Chowder deserves another shot, and a premise like this could work, I also think they're better off making something geared at the original demographic, or try to skew just a smidge older like regular show. Keep the school premise, but make it more like a boarding school or college. Something like Chowder meets Bully, and I think you'd have a hit. But when it comes to timelines, I'm also someone who likes to push characters forward and not backwards. So I'm definitely biased, especially after seeing how revivals like King of the Hill benefited from aging the characters up. Hell, give me Chowder Ball Z, where we just have a grown-up Chowder getting into shenanigans with his legion of children. I'm sure you can make that work. Chowder's kids all working as apprentices for his own catering company. Do you know how heartwarming that would be to watch? Stop burning money, Cartoon Network! Chowder wasn't the only reboot Greenblatt pitched though, as while he was developing Jellystone, he and Billy Mandy creator Maxwell Adams pitched a Looney Tunes series to Warner Bros. Animation that was tragically passed on. ACME Monster Stompers Miami. The idea behind this was that it was an action comedy a la Men in Black or Miami Vice, where Porky and Daffy are agents at ACME, which in this iteration is an organization that fights monsters. Just looking at the concept art and being a huge fan of the shows Greenblatt and Adams made growing up, I think it's a damn shame this didn't go anywhere. The beauty of Looney Tunes to me is that, like Scooby-Doo, it's a franchise that can be reinterpreted a million different ways, ranging from wild art styles to insane, out-of-the-box premises. As a kid, Looney Tunes was embracing stuff like Space Jam, Back in Action, Duck Dodgers, and the one show that everyone hates, but I think it's neat that it exists at all. So to me, it's a franchise that's designed to throw the characters into all sorts of genres and unconventional hijinks. Which is a little ironic to say, given that I'm a basic bitch whose favorite Looney Tunes is the Looney Tunes Show. The one where the gimmick is that it's Seinfeld. But since then, reboots of the property have felt safe. This feels more in line with the direction I like to see with Looney Tunes. You can tell they had a ball coming up with it. There's so much soul in these designs. Daffy hasn't had this much aura since Duck Dodgers. And these Lolas?
So good.
It feels like we were denied having another distinct, memorable take on the character. Witch Hazel would have served as the primary antagonist, as she's the leader of Sludge, ACME's adversaries, with the goal of taking over Miami by becoming its mayor.
Save us, Mom Donnie!
That bottom right design with the scar and muscles? There also would have been ACME branches all over the world, which I'm assuming would have kept the door open for Bugs, Elmer, and other Looney Tunes characters to appear. I'm dying to know who Bugs would have been paired up with in this universe, or if he's a top-ranking member. Sadly, WB felt as if this show didn't align with what they were looking for at the time, and passed on the idea. It breaks my heart this will remain a funky little concept and nothing more, unless WB somehow has a change of heart after seeing fans mourn what they could have had. I think this is a show that could very easily work today. But hey, while it's seen better days, Looney Tunes is a property that will always get rebooted. So even if we didn't get ACME Monster Stompers Miami, maybe Greenblatt and Adams will have a shot at a different fever dream of a reboot down the road.
What we do here is go back.
Need something to throw on while you draw, study, or sleep? Roundtable Rewind's got you covered. So why not take a stroll down memory lane and subscribe?
No one can tell me what to do.
See you there. Like Greenblatt, Adams hasn't had much luck reviving his own series either, as he tried to give Billy and Mandy one more movie to wrap things up, as it never really got a conclusion, despite having a surprising amount of continuity. Sure, it was 90% random bullshit go,
And that's what gave it flavor.
but there were still lore and character arcs that it adhered to. It's kind of impressive. Billy and Mandy Destroy Us All, a cosmic horror musical. Not much is known about the project beyond it being a story that's very important to Adams, that explores interdimensional horrors, Asperger's syndrome, acceptance, and exploding penguins. Definitely gives off the vibe that this was Adams pouring his life experience, his journey, his soul, into a story that wrapped up one of Cartoon Network's most iconic series, holding the answers to questions fans have had and tying up loose ends. Adams also teased the appearance of a character that he never got to use in the big special, which I imagine has to be Hector Con Carne or someone else from Grim and Evil that wasn't Scar. Judging by the only pizza concept art that we got, this either would involve time travel or have been set in the future, quite some time after the original series, as Mandy is portrayed as an adult in the sense that she's really tall for bobblehead, with Adams mentioning on Tumblr that it's tough to age up the kids. I have to imagine this is indeed a time skip, and Billy being stuck as a kid is a reflection of never feeling quite like your age, his own inability to grow up and feeling left behind by his peers. Or maybe they just thought it'd be funny if everyone aged up but him, I don't know. According to Adams, Destroy Us All was presented to the network in the summer of 2021, but was ultimately rejected because kids don't know who Billy and Mandy is, as Cartoon Network doesn't rerun this show. As obviously was a shitty explanation because who the hell was watching any type of reruns on Cartoon Network in 2021? Don't make me pull out the ratings, bro! I'll do it! However, not only were we robbed of a proper conclusion, but also a whole ass sequel. One that actually would have compromised with the late 2010s landscape and taken Billy and Mandy to serious places. Complete with full-fledged gulp character development? Yeah. Around 2019, Adams pitched another show titled Billy and Mandy in Starship Dracula. He shared the full pitch bible for this over on his Patreon, so I won't be showing everything out of respect for him and his bag. Go there on $5 and read it all for yourself. But to give you the gist, Starship Dracula follows Billy and Mandy as they're the only two people who can save the human race. Humanity has left Earth and is migrating to the planet New Jersey. But their ship, the SUS Ensville, has been taken over by Dracula and his monster posse, using the ship as their party cruise, with no plans of letting the humans get to their destination anytime soon. Starship Dracula is described as a satire of 21st pop culture, in the same way Billy and Mandy was a satire of 20th century pop culture, a show that parents could watch with their kids like the original series. However, it's a completely different show from Billy and Mandy, not just because of the new cast of characters, but because of its format. There's a loose story arc, greater world building, and a larger interest in exploring its characters beyond gags. The entire show is described as one big redemption arc, not just for Dracula and other newcomers, but Grimm, Billy, and Mandy themselves, working through their issues without steering away from the twisted dark comedy that makes the series what it is. That sounds super interesting to me, especially if we got the chance to dive into what makes Mandy tick, or how they could spin Billy's idiocy into something of substance without feeling like a total stranger. Billy and Mandy was one of my favorite shows growing up. It absolutely shaped my sense of humor, so getting an evolved version of it that leans into the melodrama and serialized elements that I eat up from other cartoons would have guaranteed plenty of glaze from my end. Honestly, I see nothing about this premise that wouldn't work today. Migrating to another planet is a timeless sci-fi story, yet it has a unique Billy and Mandy spin that makes it stand out. According to Adams, WB was into the idea, but he had to pitch it directly to Cartoon Network, who were focused on rebooting their big properties first, which to me gives some weight to the idea that they consider their 2010 shows bigger than those from the 2000s and treat them differently. Apparently, even if Cartoon Network did want more Billy and Mandy, they wouldn't want something this removed from the original, so there's very little chance we'd ever see Starship Dracula come to fruition. But hey, maybe more Billy and Mandy in general isn't out of the question. I think these characters, and this specific kind of humor, would thrive today, and I hope they stop playing with my boy and give him a green light. Now personally, I think Adams should repitch this concept, but change the setting from space to the beach. Because if anyone deserves to make Surf Dracula a reality, it's Maxwell freaking Adams. Courage the Cowardly Dog tried to make a comeback a couple of times. There was the CGI Fog of Courage short from 2014 that was supposed to air in the US but never made its way over. While it's not confirmed this was testing the waters for a full 3D revival, that was the assumption at the time. And while the short was fine, par the course for Courage the Cowardly Dog, I think we dodged a bullet. CGI cartoons, while still hit or miss, are much more refined now than they were in the 2010s. And going off these 7 minutes, I don't know if it would have been able to do the atmosphere of the series complete justice when so much of that came down to its art direction and implementation of mixed media. I think this is better as a one-off. We also know there's a prequel that series creator John R. Dilworth developed in 2018, simply titled Before Courage, focusing on Courage's life before the Bag family, featuring his parents Hope and Noble, along with other familiar faces and newcomers to the Courage universe. I think this idea has a lot of potential. While we're missing out on the comedy gold that Eustace and Muriel provide, I can see this premise maintaining both the horror and heart that made Courage unique. As long as we're in this world, there's always gonna be weirdos and oddies lurking about, no matter the time period. And I, for one, would love to get to learn more about Courage's parents, the family he had before the Bags came into the picture. Unfortunately, the idea got dropped by Cartoon Network in the early 2020s as they wanted to prioritize other ideas. Once again, a 2000s property got the cold shoulder despite being beloved by millions around the world to this very day.
We don't have that many horror cartoons out right now.
And everything we do just dips their toes in it a little instead of going all in.
If done right, having something like Courage back in the game
And equipped with the kind of spectacular animation we become accustomed to seeing,
it would give generations old and new something
truly insane to marvel over. Not to mention, there are a number of horror films and other media that Courage could pull from to conjure up new batshit ideas. In the same way the original was derivative of older horror movies amongst other influences. So I really hope that one day, the stars align and they can figure something out so this lovable pink dog can make his triumphant return with brand new adventures. The youth deserves cartoons that's gonna give them nightmares, damn it! Waking up at 3 a.m. and being afraid Ramses is outside your house is a rite of passage. Apparently, Dilworth released the animatic for the pilot in 2024, but he seems to have made it private a while ago, so
get on that, lost media enthusiast. Please.
One of my favorite shows of all time, Megas XLR, almost got a reboot.
And then one of the mergers killed it.
So as you can see, there's definitely a pattern of Cartoon Network snubbing the 2000s when it comes to reboots and revivals. They always have.
But hopefully that won't be the case forever.
Still, you can't help but wonder,
why?
Even with the reasons they gave, the generation after these shows have the luxury of being milked for all they're worth, so what gives? Well, I think it could be a couple of things. At this point, too much time simply might have passed. That the farther out we get from the 2000s, the less it makes sense to make a new series that's meant to court current viewers and the people who grew up with it, especially when the latter demographic is getting farther away from watching animation on a regular basis, when compared to the adults who grew up with their 2010s catalog. Not only does it seem like that generation doesn't get caught up in the cartoons are strictly for kids mentality as much, but since they're younger than the adults who came up with the 2000s Cartoon Network, they're more likely to be in the loop with these revivals and know where to go if they want to show up for it day one.
There's a bigger window for immediate success.
Not to mention, this generation just had a better average of hits. That's not to say the 2000s lineup wasn't popular,
but that run from Adventure Time to Steven Universe was truly something unprecedented in terms of their overall reach. Individually, they may not have sold as well as something like the Powerpuff Girls did in its prime, but combined,
these shows make up a pretty remarkable force that can rake in a buttload of money and attention, in a way that the 2000 shows just can't.
At least not right away.
I think there's also the fact that some of these shows were co-productions. Kids Next Door was Cartoon Network and Curious Pictures. Courage was Cartoon Network and Stretch Films. So although Cartoon Network still owns these characters, I don't know, maybe the rights could be tricky there. Maybe there's some legal hurdles that they just can't be bothered to overcome, which is kind of shitty, but I'm just spitballing. Again, sometimes it just feels like there's someone with power at Cartoon Network who's just gatekeeping which critters they work with. And for some godforsaken reason, they have no interest in working with their 2000s creators, unless their shows have proven to be insane moneymakers, like with Craig and Gendy. I do think the only truly retro show they'd be in a hurry to revive, if given the opportunity to work with the
original creator, aside from Powerpuff and Dexter, is Ed, Edd n Eddy. I think they jump on that revival and create an incredibly aggressive marketing campaign for it. It was their golden goose for so long, and still has such a firm grip on the culture that I truly think some new version of that with Antonucci involved would break the internet. And they'll probably never get the satisfaction of seeing that success because Antonucci owns the rights to the show, and Brother doesn't seem interested in making that at all. Not that I'm complaining, because Big Picture Show is as high of a note any show would kill to go out on. But these are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. Which of these revivals do you think could actually work if they were made today? And what other Cartoon Network shows do you want to see get a second chance at life? Let us know in the comments down below, and keep the conversation going over on Twitter and Instagram at AllTrickVox and at RoundtableVids. Shout out to our Rakota for drawing #1 in the thumbnail. Be sure to check out his work over on Instagram and YouTube. And if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe to the Roundtable with notifications on so you never miss a video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day. Peace!